All right, so with that, we can get started. So today, the Learning Wednesday session will be out on extending Shopify. Will be presentation, so you can all sit back and enjoy a snack and a drink and relax. And I'll just be talking about how we can extend Shopify a little bit, because we all come from Solidus projects, and we're used to Solidus being this open box where we can tune anything about it. We can write on the box, we can put some new stuff in the box, we can take some stuff out. We have full control over anything in the UI or in the order flow. And with Shopify, that's not the case. And as you can see in the beautiful illustration that the AI drew for me here on the right, Shopify is a black box, and the only thing we can really do is build around it. But still, there are some ways, and that's kind of what I've been talking about in the sessions that we had during the team retreat about extending Shopify. But there are some service areas where we can actually hook into Shopify, areas that Shopify exposes to us and allows us to introduce some custom behavior. And I've listed them out here, and they're all part of what Shopify calls apps. It's a very broad term, apps. I won't get too deep into it, but we can maybe save that for the questions and answers later. But yeah, there's a few ways you can extend your behavior of Shopify stores, and I'll go through all of these. You can see them listed here, and once you have the slides later today, you can click on them to further investigate, because they're all links. But we're going to be talking about UI extensions, custom pixels, theme blocks, Shopify flow, which we saw in last Learning Wednesdays, but how we can add to it, basically. We're going to be talking about embedded apps and then Shopify functions as well. So yeah, I'm going to start with web pixels because they're probably the least customizable, but it's an interesting one. Never mind. So I'm just going to start with web pixels. Shopify is moving to this checkout extensibility, and what it basically means to enable it, you need to enable the new checkout experience, which is fully controlled by Shopify. And because of that, we're losing the ability to load custom scripts on our checkout, thank you, and order status pages. And this is not fully in effect yet. I think in August this year, one part of that is going into effect for all stores, and next August in 2025, we're all forced to use this new system. But it basically means we're losing the ability to add custom JavaScript to these very important pages. And that also means that we can no longer track events on these pages using client-side tracking. So when Shopify introduced this, it also came up with a solution for specifically this tracking problem, which is web pixels. And they are isolated containers that exist around an existing tracking pixel. And this isolated container, at least in the case of custom pixels, there's two versions of pixels, basically means an iframe, and Shopify controls what data is sent to this iframe and when, basically. So as a custom pixel, you can then subscribe to these events and send them along to your platform of choice. There's two ways to create these, as I said before. There's app pixels and custom pixels. App pixels are included with apps you install on your Shopify store. And these examples of this would be Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, for example. They all have apps that you can install in your store, linked to your ads account, and that will automatically subscribe to all the events and send over the data. And in some cases, do even more than that. And then you have custom pixels that you define yourself, and they allow you to write a piece of logic, subscribe to these events, and then send some sort of web request out. And usually what you will do is you will import the tracking pixels supported by the platform, and then you will use their API to send over the data that you get by Shopify. We actually have a blog post on this if you're interested, and there are some different ways you can implement this kind of tracking. As well, you can, for example, TikTok has a very interesting approach where it does both client-side tracking using the app pixel that is installed, but then it also, because the TikTok app is installed as an app on your store, it uses the API credentials it gets by being installed in your store to then, once the event arrives on their ads platform, also fetch more information about the order server side, basically through the admin API. So you can have more data in your tracking platform and know more about the customer, segment them, everything like that. So let me quickly open that up. I should have this here. So as an example, just to give it a visual indication, it looks like there's an UI bug here. That's interesting. Anyway, you can see here, these are the pixels we have installed on the Cometeer web store. There's a bunch of them here. There's a tag manager itself, but there's also a custom pixel for Microsoft that implements this exact logic. So there is a subscription to the checkout completed event, and then we use their pixel basically with the push event to send some information over to them. That's how custom pixels work. And then app pixels are simply installed and connected. So like Pinterest here, for example, or the TikTok one I mentioned before, they come from apps. And the only thing you need to do is just enable them. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. So this way we can it's kind of a solution to a problem that was created because Shopify wants to enforce their own checkout experience on everyone. But this basically allows you to then create one unified way to track events over both your theme and the checkout pages. Let's move to the next one because those are more interesting than just tracking events. When you install apps on your Shopify store, you can expose theme blocks. Theme blocks allow you to basically define your own piece of liquid templating code, liquid partial, liquid template, that is rendered as a block in either existing sections or in standalone sections. So I think you can see my cursor. You can either have a block that renders inside a section. If you're familiar with Shopify, the Shopify liquid templating language, you define these sections that are in the admin experience. They can be stacked on top of each other to build out a page. And every section can have settings, but also individual blocks that are rendered. And if such a section supports the app block, you can include it. You can include blocks that are exposed by apps. And the app defines the liquid that is being rendered. It also defines which data is being used. And it's a very interesting way to introduce visuals into the theme, basically, or templates into the theme without if you're not able to actually edit the theme. This is, for example, an interesting thing that Sprout could do. Sprout is an app that is installed on people's stores, and we don't really have control over the theme. So if we want to create a visual element in their theme that does something for Sprout, we would have to expose a bit of theme logic through a partial as an app block. The example that Shopify gives here in this example is a rating app, which shows the small block here to show the amount of stars, and then all the reviews in the bottom as a standalone section. And then the other types of embedded blocks are embedded blocks, which you can see here. An example is a sort of a helper tag or an accessibility tag, or like maybe a customer service element that shows up on the page that is not specific to a section, but more for the whole page or the whole site itself. All right, another way to extend Shopify stores is Shopify Flow. We've seen it in the last Learning Wednesdays where we did a little exercise with it, but basically for those who haven't seen that or were not there, Shopify Flow is a way for merchants themselves to create blocks and basically code in some sort of behavior. So you can see an example here on the right where on a specific trigger, which is when the variant quantity, the variant inventory quantity change, we check something, we do a condition, and then if that condition is true, we send an email. And there's a bunch of actions and conditions that and triggers that Shopify exposes by itself, but we can actually create our own triggers and our own actions and expose them to the Shopify admin. So I wrote down a little example here on the left. For example, if you're building a subscription app, you might want to expose a trigger for a subscription created or a subscription renewed, or an action that can pause an existing subscription. And when you expose those to the Shopify Flow app, you can then let the merchant define custom logic that happens So they could create a condition that when a subscription is created and it contains a specific product, maybe someone is emailed, or maybe they send it to an external service to track something about it. It's a very the Shopify Flow app is very, very user-friendly, and it can allow merchants to define their own pieces of logic without the involvement of us as developers. So it can be a really nice way to create custom behavior by just exposing these triggers and these actions for the custom logic that you've been building. Another very powerful one, but probably the most complicated one from this whole list, is embedded views. If you have your app installed on a Shopify store, then you can create an embedded view, which will be an iframe that is rendered in the admin UI under your own app. So you can see here there is the navigation on the left of your Shopify store. This is the admin panel, and then under the apps you'll be able to find the app you installed. And once you click it, there will be, if your app supports it, you will be able to render an embedded piece of an iframe, or as an iframe, and you can render any UI you want here. So again, if you're a subscription app, you could, for example, use this to render out all the active subscriptions. And this even supports multiple pages. So you could click on those subscriptions to see their details. You could add buttons to it to cancel subscriptions, pause subscriptions, these kind of things. And it would feel like a very integrated part of the Shopify admin. This can be very interesting for clients who have like custom demands or custom needs that encompass entire like workflows, and they need to be able. And a nice way to create an interface for them would be to embed it in the Shopify admin itself. You can also see that in this example, the buttons and the elements in this embedded app actually look a lot like what the Shopify admin UI looks like, and that's because Shopify exposes has libraries for their UI, which is called Polaris, and you're free to use that. You don't have to because you're in control of rendering it, but if you do use that UI, you will create a very native-looking experience on Shopify admin panels. Cool. Did I miss anything? Yeah, no. All right. And then another very powerful way to extend logic on Shopify's side is Shopify functions. They allow you to literally inject pieces of code into Shopify's own logic, basically. There's the different extension points that Shopify allows for, and you can kind of see them on the right here as the examples. And you're able to write a piece of logic that has input and output, and that is run on these specific conditions, and that can alter the behavior of Shopify. So this is sort of a little bit what we're used to maybe with Solidus, where we can inject our own piece of logic at a certain point, basically hooking into logic. But it is limited in a lot of ways because it's directly in the flow of what Shopify is doing. For example, during a checkout, it is limited in how much time it can take to run. The maximum amount of lines of code you write is limited. The input and output size is constrained. It cannot use too much resources. It needs to be non-deterministic. There's a bunch of requirements, and it needs to be hosted on Shopify. And I think the two languages they support right now for you to use are Rust and JavaScript. But they allow you to do some pretty cool things that the platform itself, or like without Shopify functions, does not support yet. And I'd like to highlight some examples that are shown here on the right. These are actual getting started guides on the Shopify dev site, on their documentation site. So if you're interested in them, look them up. But for example, you can create a discounts function, which is this one over here. And it will allow you to create a custom type of discount that maybe isn't supported by the official discounts page, basically, that exists in the admin UI. Let's say maybe you're building a loyalty program and you want to give a specific amount of discount, but only on specific products. This starts to get quite complicated and something that is not fully supported on the Shopify admin itself. So you can write this logic yourself. and include in a function to then apply those discounts. There is a location rule function example here that allows you to make sure that certain locations are chosen during checkout, so you'll get more control over where orders are routed to. But there's also validation rules, which is this one here, that allow you to determine when certain orders are allowed to be checked out and some or not, basically. Yeah. Cool. And then this again is the overview of current and extension points where you can add in your own logic and the API you have access to when you hook into those endpoints, because all of the endpoints have a different different API that you can use to connect back to Shopify, basically, and then tell what to do based on your own logic. And then the final one I wanted to discuss is UI extensions. As I mentioned before with the web pixels, there is Shopify has sort of taken back control of the rendering of the checkout and basically only allows you to customize it now if you're on the new experience. Only customize it by certain fields, so you can set logos, some colors, typefaces, and background colors. But the main checkout is now rendered by Shopify and no longer by your theme. And so are the thank you pages and the order status pages. But as a result, we get we get UI extensions for the checkout. So those allow us to take back a little bit control, and in certain places on the checkout, add in our own UI. I can show an example of that. I have it ready here. So this is, for example, the comment here checkout. And one of the elements we have here is this virtual product here. So whenever you have a selection of, that's my screenshot. Whenever you have a selection of these two products, basically, in your cart, we will show you the virtual product that represents. Because we've recently switched over to, keep pressing the wrong button, recently switched over to buying individual sleeves, but just showing 2 medium rose sleeves and 2 light rose sleeves is confusing to customers. So we still want to show them why we've added those 2 to the cart, and that's because they originally selected the light and medium rose curated box. So this is a sort of a static element that, based on the cart contents, renders something in the checkout. But we also have this, let me get into view here. We also have this more dynamic element where you can add more coffees to your order, basically as an upsell, which is also rendered as a checkout UI extension. And the products being rendered are selected from a specific collection that we can configure on the admin side. So those are 2 examples of checkout extensions. Then there are different spots. Then there are again different spots. So those are checkout extensions. There's also the new account portal that Shopify offers. Currently, it's still optional to use the new account portal. You can continue using the legacy one where you're in full control of rendering the account portal for customers. But the new account portal is starting to get some features that are exclusive to it. And but again, Shopify has full control over its rendering. So the only way to inject our own UI to it, let's say, again, we are a subscriptions app and we want to add a page where people can see their active subscriptions, we'll need to write a account UI extension where we define our UI, how it fetches the subscriptions, and then let Shopify render it for us once someone opens the account portal. And most interestingly, or what I've recently experimented with, are admin UI extensions, and they're kind of similar to actions because they're all both in the admin panel. So they allow you to render in specific points on the admin UI elements, basically UI elements as well. And actions allow you to define buttons in certain dropdowns. So you can be looking at an order in your Shopify admin, and there would be a button there, or like a dropdown with actions, and you could add an action to it. For example, let's say, again, you're a subscription app. You might want to, on an order, add a button that links you back to the subscription that order belongs to. And that's what admin UI extensions and actions can be used for. And I also have an example of that. This video was terribly uploaded and compressed. So I'll go to the original. So here we see an example of what one of those extensions could look like in the admin. So we are here in the admin portal. I'm not going to scroll up or down because I don't want to show any more specifics about this order. But basically on comments here, we have this mapping engine for which all the kudos go to Nicolo, but it maps coffees from virtual products basically to actual coffees. And we've recently been working on that system to use points scoring. So it will basically assign the coffee based on how many points it receives, and those points are based on a lot of different elements. And we've had this meta field on our orders that is a huge JSON object that shows kind of why certain coffees were selected, but that's not a very nice way for operators, for people who go into the admin to see why was this coffee assigned on this specific order. And so instead, we've experimented with this admin UI block here, where you can open up for every line item what the coffees were that were considered. So these are the top 3. There's more in the official JSON, but there's a limit to how big an app block can be. So we're constraining it to 3, and we can see the top 3 candidates were the one that was picked, and then 2 other ones. And we can see the points that were attached to this order, and we can also see where that comes from. So we can see the types of logic, or like the filters basically that are applied, and the kind of score that gets out at the end. So if this product was not already in the box, it's got a 5x multiplier on it, and now we can actually see where this information comes from. And we can see that for this product, the highest choice was this one, the original light, and then we've got this coffee. And we can see that indeed, because the second coffee is also a light roast, this time we chose the second one. And then the second option for that one, okay, that's the one here. So it's a very nice visual way to display to the operators in the admin UI, where they are already doing their daily job, what happened to an order and how. And this is something, for example, that you could build with the admin UI extensions. Yeah, okay, cool. Let me see. Yeah, so this is the hugely compressed video showing it, so we can skip that. Okay, so I wanted to then take the next probably 10 minutes to kind of explore how I built that admin UI extension, and to kind of show you what it looks like to build any of these kind of extensions. They are all parts of an app that you install on your Shopify store. This app needs to be registered in the Shopify partner portal, and then you install it on your store. Shopify basically defines a lot of things as apps, but for these behaviors that extend the store, it needs to be installed in this way. And I kind of wanted to quickly loop through that and show you some of the details on how this works and how you define these extensions. So let's first look at the possible targets for admin UI extensions. So there is the buttons, the admin UI actions that we can see here, and let me see if I can make this a little bigger. That is making it smaller. Okay. There we go. Okay, so maybe one smaller. So we can see for the different targets that we can add a button to the more actions button here. So here they have a Puzzlify button, and it shows up as once you click on it, you generate a modal. And we can see that for all of them, the visual is the same, but it shows you where the button will be located under. So here it will be under the 3 dots menu. So again, Shopify is always very nicely documented on what happens where. But for our checkout UI extension, our admin UI extension, we want to show details on the order. So I click here on order details, and it will show me, okay, if you use this target, then your logic will render here in an app block at the bottom of the orders page. So that's indeed what we need. Cool. Yeah, so that's the targets. And then I want to talk a little bit about app authentication and API access, which are also important parts of setting up an admin extension, any kind of extension for the admin portal, whether it's UI or not. But there is the part about app authentication. which means that any sort of request you make from your extension, it will be signed with an OpenID Connect token, which allows you to then communicate to some sort of backend that you set up. So any extension you create in the admin portal is actually being rendered on the client side, as you, for example, in the demo that I just showed you. And if we want to fetch data from our own backend, let's say we build a custom subscriptions app and it has its own, it's a Rails app and it has its own database, and we want to fetch some information from there, we need to make sure that we are authenticated and that we let the app know that we are actually a Shopify customer, or like a Shopify account that is authenticated, and that the app is installed on our store. And this will happen automatically for you with extensions if you follow the documentation here by including this token. And there's also some things that need to be set up on the server using the Shopify app gem, but I won't get too detailed into that because for this specific example, we don't need any of that. But I thought it was interesting to highlight. And then there is the direct API access, which is something we do need, but it allows you to query the Shopify admin API, at least in the case of admin UI extensions. And basically what you can do is you can either use the query method or call the API, and Shopify will take care of adding in the right tokens for you to make sure that the request goes through and that it uses the scopes assigned to your app. So for example, in the example that I just showed you, it would be the read orders scope. Cool. So those are the kind of the elements that we need, and then I'll show you a little bit of the code. So I hope this is readable. I think so. Okay. So yeah, let me start on the Shopify extension. So you can see here for Cometeer, we kind of have one app set up and it exposes multiple extensions. So one of them is, or these two are on the checkout. So the bundle details one is the one you saw on the top, where it shows the virtual product basically that you're ordering. And then the Bifrost actually is the one that shows you the upsells. And then this one is a different one. And the one I created for the admin UI is a skewer mapping. So you can see you can have multiple of these extensions inside one single app that is then installed. And this also applies to app blocks. They can also be defined as an extension in here. Theme blocks, app theme blocks that are then exposed to the theme. So, and one of the nice things about using only extensions in here and not having a backend is that Shopify takes care of the hosting for us. So we don't actually need to, we can just upload this to Shopify and it will run all the logic, basically all on the client side anyway. So it will just host the code for us and make sure it's injected in the right places. There's nothing complicated that we need to do here. So it's a nice advantage if you're using some of these basic extension functionalities. For more complex ones, you might need to host your own app. But in this case, we don't have a backend, so that's nice. But yeah, you can see here it defines the type of extension that this is. It's a UI extension. It defines some parts about the name. This is a specific tag for the internationalization. And then it defines the capability. So this specific extension that we just looked at, it needs to have API access, but it doesn't need to have network access, which is another capability that you could set on an extension, which allows it to make external requests. In this case, that's not necessary, and we haven't defined that. So we can only make requests to the admin API. And then we define the target, where is this extension going to render, as well as the sort of the entry point, which is the block extensions, the JSX. And you can see in this case that the extension is written in using React, and Shopify has this set of components that you can use for rendering that. You're not free to just render anything you want. You need to use their components and structure components, buttons that are defined by them. And I think I had a link for that. I'll quickly show that. So this one is this, yeah. So you can see here the library that is kind of given to you. So you don't need to think about styling, but you do need to adhere to their components. So there's actions, form elements. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, so media. So there's an icon library included, progress indicators for loading, and then some more advanced elements that contain that like are collapsible, and then structure components. Basically, this is a vertical flexbox and this is a horizontal one. That's kind of how you could see it if you're thinking about it in like CSS. And then there are the text elements. So this is kind of your arsenal for building out the extension, and the main reason why Shopify does it, at least that I'm assuming, is to make sure that any of the extensions that are being built actually fit in with the rest of the admin UI look. And there's actually a different set of components that you can use if you, for example, build a, I think I put a different link here. Yeah, if you're building a checkout UI extension, the library will look slightly different of the components that you have access to. There are some elements in here that we didn't see on the admin UI extensions. For example, here's something about maps. There's popovers, payment icons. So depending on the type of extension that you build, you will have access to a different library of elements. Let's quickly go back and I'll quickly show you what's included in here. So from here on out, it's mostly just React. So I won't go too deep into those things, but interestingly, we have this use API call, which comes from the Shopify UI extensions library, and it gives us this query object, which allows us to query the admin API. And basically, it will take care of all the authentication for us. The only thing we need to do is provide our GraphQL query and our variables, and that's that. It will also provide some basic data, which in this case includes the ID of the order. And then the rest of this logic is all to basically either render a loading. Well, I could have used the loading indicator, but in this case, I just wrote down loading. And if everything is loaded, it will render the mapping line items one by one. And those are all individual components that are just React components at this point. But at every level, you can see I'm using these official components as defined by the Shopify UI library. Yeah, so I think that's a good overview of how the checkout extension is built up. And I can come back here. All right. So that's kind of what I prepared for today. So I'm seeing that I'm a little short, but I've also been talking for 35 minutes, so probably it's time for a break anyway. I hope from all of this you take away. I didn't go into too much in depth onto all of the ways to extend, but I hope the takeaway you take for any of the projects that you're going to be working on that involve Shopify is that there are a bunch of ways to extend Shopify, and you kind of have to keep in mind what the abilities are. You also kind of need to keep up to date because these areas that you can extend, they increase, and there is more and more abilities to put your own, to kind of inject your own logic into Shopify and customize its behavior. And there is lots of ways to achieve things other than by creating a whole middleware app. Sometimes it's easier to use one of these approaches here. So I'll share the slides later, and hopefully you can use it in the future or maybe already soon as sort of an index of how you can extend Shopify and maybe where you should look to implement certain types of behaviors. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and accept any questions.